Hi everyone, I'm Alister Benn and this is Vision and Light. This week I'm speaking to another great friend of mine from the United States, John Barclay. Now, John and I only became acquainted really for the first time back in April when we were both involved in the Out of Chicago Live conference that we both did. Now, I was on a panel with John and I was immediately impressed not just by his photography, but his very meditative, contemplative and thoughtful approach, not just to his time in the field, but his time in front of the computer as well. And it was very clear that we had quite a lot of common. And we have a lot of mutual friends in common, people like Sarah Marino and Jennifer Renwick, etc. Now, during this conversation, we talked quite candidly about John's mantra and methodology, which is called dream, believe, and create. And they're three words that I think we can all resonate with. And we had a very enlightening conversation for about an hour. It was really quite interesting. So please strap yourselves in, grab a drink of your choice, and I hope you enjoy this week's Vision and Light episode number 21, which is myself, Alister Benn, talking with John Barclay. Well, John Barclay, it's a pleasure for you to take time out of your day to come and have a chat with me.
Well, I'm really excited to be here, Alister, because I've been watching you and especially the interviews that you've been doing, and it's humbling to be here. I mean, you've had some pretty amazing humans first. You know, it's interesting. The people, Sarah Marino, for instance, comes to my mind, and I adore Sarah Marino. Bill Neal, I mean, good grief. I mean, he's a legend, and on and on and on. And so it's an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Alister.
You're more than welcome. You're more than welcome, and you're not out of place on that list, well, in my mind. So that it's.
That's funny, and that's probably something I should use a therapist for. But I don't feel that way at all, and I don't know how you respond to that too when somebody puts you in that category, because I don't feel like I'm in that level at all. And so it is humbling to me to be very, very
well fun. Yes, and I think the people who I enjoy speaking to all feel like that, and I wonder if that's an attribute that's a useful attribute to have as a creative person, as a sense of humility and a sense of almost a slight insecurity about the quality of our own work.
Well, I think about musicians, and I don't know about you, but there's a lot of musicians who end up being photographers. As a matter of fact, many photographers, if you look, I think I saw guitars maybe in your office at some point. Yeah.
5.
Well, I've got, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 acoustics up here. I've got a mandolin hanging up there. I've got 2 ukuleles in here. Yeah. Right. Tony Sweet, a friend, he's a drummer, a jazz drummer, a really good jazz drummer. Ansel, Bill Neal. I think, doesn't Bill Neal? I think he's a musician as well. No, I don't think who I'm thinking of is, forgetting. It's early in the morning, Alister. It's not for you though. But I do think, and I think about Barbra Streisand, who would get sick every time she'd go out to sing, clearly evident of those anxiousness. And so I do wonder if that's part of the gig. The reality is you go look at a lot of other people's work and it's fantastic. I mean, it's stunningly good. I have gotten to the place where I really work hard not to compare myself to others. As hard as that is, because it's human, right? It's really human to go look at somebody else's work and see it as grand. It's a lot. I liken it unto hanging wallpaper. Believe it or not, there was a time, Alister, where I actually liked hanging wallpaper. I know that's silly. But I would know where every single mistake was.
Right.
Somebody else would walk in that room. They'd have no clue. They'd just go, wow, great job. Not me. I'd go, yeah, but look at that,
So this musician thing, I'm a guitar player primarily. Since I was like 13 or 14, I've been playing guitar. Yeah. And when I compose something myself, mm-hmm. It's very different from making photographs. I don't have much similarity in those, and there's not a lot of crossover for me in those processes. And when I play something on the guitar, it's just a very different relationship with it, because I think it's purely coming out of my imagination. Whereas photography, you're dealing with something in the world, and it's almost you're having to isolate that thing from the bigger picture. How do you feel that your photography and your musicality either complement each other or are different aspects or facets of your personality?
Oh gosh, I've never thought about that. But
Good.
yeah, good. But the initial response is kind of what you just said rings very true, because I've written a number of songs as well. So as I'm sitting here thinking about what you're saying, you're right. The process of writing, it's, well, for me, some people write words first and then put chords to it, right? But I'm just banging out chords until something happens that I like. So yes, it's a very different process. Yet I think the reason that people who are musical gravitate towards photography and maybe can find that little place or comfort zone of it being art, because not everybody can get to even to that place, right, of saying, yes, I'm an artist, rather than, oh, I'm just a photographer, right? But I think the musicality and all the different instruments I've played through the years helped me to be more comfortable with the creative process. Knowing that I had to practice, knowing I had to do my scales, knowing all those things. This is why I play tuba and trumpet and baritone horn, played in the Dixieland professionally for a while with the tuba. And, so you've got to learn that stuff. Well, I think that very much carried over to learning the equipment of photography so that it can get out of the way of the creative process. Right. So I always say, as I'm teaching, I want to know my gear so well that I'm liberated to pursue the vision part of what I'm interested in.
Right.
So I would say that's the carryover right away that I would come to.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that totally. I'm very much aware of your dream, believe, create ethos, and I got a lot of value out of watching the webinar that you did with the Nature Photographers Network not so long ago, and some of the things that kind of came out of that in my mind were it seems so easy to be a landscape photographer, buy a camera, walk out into the landscape, point your camera at stuff, stick it into the computer.
How hard can it be?
How hard can it be, and obviously, using musical metaphors and analogies, which I think we might do a lot of in this talk because it's a shared language for us, is you walk into a guitar store and spend 15 grand on a beautiful 1969 Fender Stratocaster, and it does not mean you can play Purple Haze. Or
I still can't play Purple Haze. Yeah.
But it's I really love that aspect. Do you think there's a shift in contemporary society that's basically is more in tune with instant gratification, and people just there's a reluctance for people to invest the amount of time that's necessary to not master. I don't think I'll ever master photography or the guitar, but just to gain that it takes a long time.
Well, what's the recent book that everybody talks about, right? 10,000 hours. But yeah, so the question I think you asked was, is there this propensity, I'm trying to come up with the right word, for people to want to get that camera and run out and do Alister Benn or do Tony Sweet or do Ansel Adams, right, or whatever, and that just doesn't happen. And you fight that a lot, I think, with a lot of people who think it really is that easy. And I like the analogy that you have of the one that I've heard many times is of the oven, the stove, right? You have a lovely meal and somebody says, wow, you must have a really, really nice stove. It just makes absolutely no sense. I mean,
right.
So trying to help people understand that the art of what we do takes years. It's never ending, in my opinion. I don't think there's an arrival point.
Something you talk about a lot in that presentation that you did for NPN is the concept that we're always evolving, we're always changing. I think you mentioned the word maturing quite often.
Yeah.
In that your images mature as you mature, and therefore any sort of definition of right or wrong seems somewhat arbitrary to me. It's like looking back 10 years on an image and saying, well, that was wrong.
No, it just was what it was at the time. Here's a great
Right.
story. So I was sharing that presentation, and at the end of the presentation, and in the room was the world famous DeWitt Jones, 22-year National Geographic photographer, extraordinary speaker. He does speakers alongside of the Colin Powells of the world. He's just extraordinary. So I was nervous as could be about presenting an earlier iteration of that Dream, Believe, Create. And at the end of that, I show that asylum picture that went out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And actually it was closed down because of the horrific abuse being perpetrated on these kids. And it was interesting because I would say, originally what I would say before the discussion with DeWitt was that first happy image, that HDR garish, happy, joyful, which is what I was feeling at that moment, was wrong. And DeWitt came up to me after that lecture and he said, no, it wasn't wrong, John. It was exactly right for what you were feeling at that moment in time. It wasn't until I learned what happened there that it changed how I felt about that. So
Right.
the same thing then, Alister, as we look back on imagery that we made 10 years ago, sure, I'm not going to lie. My wife keeps one image in our house and I walk by and it makes me wince. And she says, but that's the John I fell in love with who could do that. And so she sees it in a very different way. And I still want to rip it down and say it's no good. But the reality is it is good. It was when I created that back then, I was exceedingly happy. I put it in a frame and I put it up. Right? All that's happened, in my opinion, from then till now is I've matured. I've grown primarily as a human being, primarily as a person. Yes, I've gained insights through people I've studied with and looking at other people's images. That's all part of it. But the more I do this, the longer I'm around. And again, I appreciate you having Bill, Neil, and I on this. You're representing the elderly folks.
You have a lot. You have a lot to say.
Well,
let me tell you that, and it's more relevant than ever.
Well, thank you. But so that's what I'm in touch with more and more, is that I no longer want to be focusing on f-stops and shutter speeds. I know that. And the reality is, as I teach, I can teach that pretty quickly. What I'm really interested is, as my friend Ricky Cook, another Nat Geo guest, what happens before I trip the shutter? That's what's more important. What's happening in those moments before I start to compose something? What is taking me? What is calling to me? And taking to me is the most important word, because in my mind, and I know this is trite because it's been said by many others more famous than I'll ever be, or more intelligent than I am, that we really are not taking images. We're being taken by something. But I love that language, because that helps me more than anything to be in touch with and not only in touch with, but to start to really drill down and think about what is it I'm trying to do here. If I can't be in touch with what it is that's calling to me, I think my chances of being able to show you that are going to be very difficult.
Something I'm clearly a music lover, and music for me has been a huge part of my life. And I was a big Rush fan, the Canadian rock band.
Sure.
They were a band I was really, really into. And it was often said about Rush that they were the soundtrack of your life.
Yeah.
If you were a Rush fan from the age of early teens or whatever, Rush were the soundtrack of your life. And I kind of look now, I've broadened my tastes somewhat, so it's not just Rush that I listen to, but the music that I can remember throughout my life is the soundtrack of my life. And I could listen to a song and it would take me straight back to the girl I was in love with, or the place I was in the world, or driving along a certain road in a car, or hiking with earbuds, or whatever it might be. A moment in my life becomes synonymous with that music. Do you think that images can and do represent exactly that same thing in our lives?
Right back to that place. It's just incredible, right? when you're talking about music, I can remember taste even, or I can sense taste sometime with a song that comes on, or smells even, like you're like transported back. It's exactly the same with photography. All of a sudden I'm going through imagery, and especially in these COVID times, I go back to older images that I didn't get to. And man, I am right there, smelling, remembering. And yeah, I love your smile, because that's what it is. It's like, oh my gosh, that day was amazing. And I can remember the birds chirping and everything about what was going on, which again dials right back to what's going on before I press the shutter. Am I connected? Am I engaged in this process? Because if I'm at that point where I have no desire to go chase anything anymore. I'm too old to be chasing things. I want to be allowing stuff, right? And I don't want to chase too far from my car either. That's not totally true. I'm still in decent enough shape. I cycle 30 miles every other day if I can on a bike.
Excellent.
And, try to stay in shape. So, but on the other hand, I mean, I'm not up for a 30-mile hike like Josh Cripps is. I'm just not going to do it, but again, back to your question, absolutely. That's part of the enjoyment of photography, is that ability to remember. I think that's the best word I can come up with.
Do you think that there's too much focus on the concept of photographic perfection?
Oh, big time.
In terms of sharpness and focus and all of this type of thing, because if we extend that metaphor, the musical metaphor, you could listen to an old crappy partially warped tape of a song and it would still conjure that memory from 30 or 40 years ago. And because I posted a video last week on my regular YouTube channel, and there was an image that I said, well, it wasn't sharp, so therefore it wasn't useful as a product, but it was still a totally valuable life experience. And someone kind of said, well, it's a fail. And I said, well, it's not a fail. It's not a failed moment. I don't strike it from the record just because the product, in inverted commas, is somehow partially flawed.
Yeah, I watched that video actually last night. Yep. And so I would agree 100%, because, well, let's do this. If what we're talking about here essentially is, if we kind of drill right to the point of photography, for me, again, Freeman says it, again, different people say, Freeman Patterson says that camera points both ways, right?
Right.
So that means that every image you make is a reflection of you. Why would you be so critical of that? Why?
Because there's a really, really obvious answer to that question.
Right. But isn't that what you're doing? You're being incredibly critical of yourself. And I don't think that's healthy. I think we can certainly, I think it's important to evaluate ourselves and be critical to the extent of, is it sharp and usable? That's not what I'm talking about. That's very different critical. That's critical of product and will it sell? That's a whole different box. The box I'm talking about is being careful with me, being careful with you, because we have stuff that we bring to photography. We have baggage up the wazoo. And I would say, back to your question about music and how does it, I mean, the reason I write music sometimes is it's cathartic. It helps me tell the story. It helps me get the pain out, right, of whatever it is I'm writing about, or the joy, right? So same thing with photography. I mean, and do I go out every time and am I thinking about this stuff? No, it's very subconscious, but it's very real. I'll go to bed thinking about photography and the next day a lot. But do I bring that actually into the moment of photography? Am I actually doing that? No, I want to be much more open, be an open vessel to what's taking me, and go with that. And at that time, then what's going to happen? I'm going to make probably 100 really mediocre images, but that's okay, because you know what that is for me? It's my process. Mm-hmm. It's just the process. So it doesn't make it a good or bad. Labels are awful, good or bad, good light, bad light, an ugly face, a beautiful face. All that stuff is really dangerous territory, because now we're judging. And as soon as we start to judge something, man, you can go off the rails really fast, rather than just how about think about it as what it is graphically. It's a triangle, it's a circle, it's an oval, it's a two rectangles, and start building images that way rather than it's good or bad light or good or bad scene or, gosh, you know, there's haze in the sky today and there's smoke. Well, go with it.
Right. Whoa, God, we've covered a lot of ground
Sorry.
already. No, it's
I started
so
to get on a
stimulating.
soapbox there, didn't I?
Well, you know, this is why I get so much out of this job, you know, because talking to people with passion, and passion, I believe, is a prerequisite for creativity.
Amen.
You know, so much of what you say resonates. And I think a lot of what I've said historically resonates with you. And I think that's why we're sat here today having this conversation. Judgment, I think, is a very dangerous thing. You know, like you say, good, bad, better, worse, like, don't like, all of that type of language, I think ultimately leads us to separatist, you know, polarization, which I don't think we need any more of right now in society. So I think more sort of coming together and coalescing with positivity is a far better way to go. Something I did want to ask you is, you mentioned in your presentation again about making images that make your heart sing. And when you talked about writing music, you said releasing the pain, getting the pain out, or whatever it is you might be feeling. Now, those are very different things. Yeah. So do you ever use photography as a therapy for getting rid of pain? And if so, how does that differ from a creative process musically? That's a huge question.
Yeah, that's a huge question. But that's okay. I like doing, you know, early on when I'm doing some of these interviews, it's scary as all heck, because this is what you're worried about, is this moment right now, right? But that's okay. I feel if I could have a couch right now, I'd feel better. I'd just lay down and you'd be my therapist, Alister. But that's really, really good question, because I tend to think about photography in a very positive light.
Yeah.
But in music, I can write those painful songs. That's kind of curious, isn't it? But if I think about that image that I just shared with you about that institution, once I learned about the hell that was perpetrated on those children and the reason that place was shut down, man, when I tell the story live and I'm doing that lecture, oftentimes I'll say, unfortunately, I have knowledge of abuse on a personal level. And because of that, I went not to anger, I went to rage. Yeah. And I felt rage. I was like, whoa, I mean, and then guess what else I felt? Shame. I felt shame because how could I see those teddy bears at this abandoned place and not be smart enough to figure it out? I was like, right. So you talk about negative self-talk. I was like, gosh, John, you are so stupid. How could you miss? I was so wrapped up in the moment of joy with my friends there photographing and learning about HDR and doing all that stuff. So once I found out what it was very much an opportunity for me to reprocess that, or process. How did we say? I like process.
Tomato.
Yeah, process is so much nicer. Process that image in a very different way. It became dark, really dark, with that light coming through the window. And now that was processed very much for what I was feeling, which was very dark and very angry and rage. I mean, rage, that's deep. I mean, that's really angry beyond angry. And so I would say that's the first one that came to my mind as you said that. Yes.
Well, and it was in my mind also because, you know, I was looking at it earlier today, and I'm glad you answered the question in the way you did, because it was quite clear that you do.
Yes.
But now obviously there's human elements involved there. You know, as you say, you're in a man-made environment, and you're talking about lives that have been lost and brutalized in that way. And that's not something we tend to have to deal with in the landscape. But graphically within the landscape, there's certainly chaos and tension and sort of personifications, anthropomorphisms of human emotion. Now, a lot of your work is very, very emotional. You know, looking through your portfolios, looking at your body of work, there seems to be a huge amount of emotion in it, but and like you say, most of it appears to be quite joyful. Maybe that's just what you use photography for.
Yeah, and I would say, gosh, I hate talking like this, but in trying to be honest here, I would say generally I am perceived probably as a pretty joyful, outgoing person, right? And especially, I spent 35 years in the sales world. I had my own business selling in the medical device space, so I was an independent sales rep. Yeah, you got to be somewhat of a self-motivated person. You got
You
to
do?
be a people person. You got to do those things, and I think I have those skills. So I tend to focus on that. I'm not a big fan of the negative. So I wonder if that, again, Dr. Ben here.
My brother's Dr. Ben.
Oh,
I'm
that's
just
great.
regular.
Well, you're the doctor of photography. That's fine with me. And so, yeah, I would say I tend to lean towards that. But again, I'm not opposed to, or I'm not going to shy away from an obvious darker situation. And I would say, if I start to look at some of my black and white imagery, there is some darker tones and shades of life that probably appear more there than in the color side.
Well, it was curious because the part of your presentation where you were putting, probably the one that really springs to my mind is the pink lily and the green lily pads.
Yes.
That color harmony is generally, it's quite a positive,
Yes.
upbeat kind of color palette, and as soon as you strip that away, it becomes very graphic and really quite stark.
Yeah.
So I think color harmony has a huge amount of impact on our kind of cognitive perception, or innate cognitive perception. So yeah, I can see, I mean, obviously in black and white, stripping away those color palettes allows us to have a different emotional relationship with the work.
Big time. Yeah.
I carry a lot of or have historically carried a lot more anxiety with me. And I think my work got really dark, but it was ultimately, there was always hope in it.
Okay.
You know, so, and it's funny because coming back to that photograph again in the old asylum, you know, you mentioned the word hope.
I did. Well, I actually wrote that. It was a ray of hope for those kids that finally somebody came along and said, no, we're done. We're shutting this place down. Yeah. And so you're right. Even in all that darkness, I want to find the hope.
Well, you know, and I think that's a great lesson for everybody, really, because, you know, I mean, if you've looked at some of the previous episodes of this, like the one with David Johnson in particular, we talk a lot about depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. TJ Thorne and I have talked a lot about
Love
it.
that interview. Yeah.
You know, so Guy Tal and myself have talked about it. Sarah Marino and myself have talked about it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's. I want to get back to the sort of, because, you know, you're clearly an educator and you're someone who has great passion about educating. And it seems to me that you're part of, or we, because I would include myself in that, we are part of a peer group of people now who are promoting very different attributes for photography. We're very much changing the focus from photography for being much more about creating a stereotypically, societally standardized view of the aesthetic, to making it much more of an experiential event where the product is somehow a function of that and less of a focus on that. How much of this has been a transition for you over the last decade or so? How much of that was just innately in you when you first got into photography? So, you know, is it a conscious thing that you're driving towards, or is it just where your passion lies?
Again, go back to Nancy Rotenberg. What a blessing to have that woman in my life who taught those things that you and I now love. She was way ahead of the curve, way ahead of the curve. And so her book, you know, right here, it's next to me every day. That's where it sits because I have to look at it every day. It's a phenomenal book. I was just part of a Kickstarter campaign with her daughter. I called her and I was the one who gave the idea. I said, you need to republish this. The world needs this book. This book is not about photography. It's about your creative life.
Right.
And so all the way back 20 years ago, I was thinking this way. And I was having to learn about the techniques, but my ideas of learning the techniques so well that you're liberated to pursue your vision are old. They go way back. And so I am so grateful for the Sarahs and for you and many others who are saying, no, let's photograph what makes your heart sing. Let's photograph you. Let's put you into it. And let's not say that it has to fit this structure, these rules. Look, the guidelines are great. They're there for a reason, right? I mean, the masters of thousands of years ago in painting came up with these things that felt right. They felt good when you put things in certain places. So that all makes a lot of sense. But if it doesn't feel good to you, again, I get back to the idea, Alister, of who am I to tell you that you should, and that should word drives me crazy, to put that tree over to the right side, John. It will feel more comfortable. To whom? To you or me? No, Chuck Kimmerly puts stuff right in the middle all the time, right, and it looks fantastic. I adore his work. So circling back again, I am so grateful that there's more and more people who are out there giving people the basic fundamental knowledge of photography. That's important. We've covered that 3 times now, how critical it is. And it's critical to me that you know it so well that it gets out of the way. That's why it's so important. And now let's talk about the stuff that's really important. Really important is that connection. Having experiences are way more powerful than an idea in your mind and going and chasing and getting it. Now, got to be careful on that, because Josh Cripps had an idea recently, went and chased that image over in, I think it was Dubai, right, of the camel with an image of a freaking millennium, not of a lifetime. I mean, it is over the, and I know Josh personally, he's a dear friend, and I know how he thinks. He's an engineer, and he went after that, right, and huge success. So please, those who are listening, don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to say you should or shouldn't again. That's not who I am. I'm saying I'm simply inviting and asking you to consider the possibility that as you put more of you into your photography, you're going to be way more satisfied. And as you stop chasing things, you're going to be way more satisfied.
Yeah, I agree with you that I'm trying to make my teaching as inclusive as possible, rather than sort of saying, well, all that's rubbish, really, and any of these things that I don't do have no value.
That would be bad. Yeah, I don't think that's right. We need to learn from all different types of teachers.
Well, it's like music as well. I mean, it's like saying if you only listen to Mozart, you might think that all other music is rubbish.
Yeah.
And if you tell someone to get into music and say, well, if you don't listen to Mozart, then you've got no taste or whatever. Right. We are covering. I was kind of looking forward to this one. It's always, I think we're on the same page. Now, in terms of, I'm very into the concepts of what's conscious, what's subconscious.
Yeah.
Now, looking in, you've got a very diverse creative output. You've your macro, landscape, small scenes, intimate scenes, architecture, portraiture.
Yeah, I am all over the map, aren't I?
You've got quite a spectrum, sort of travel type photography.
Mm-hmm.
Black and white, color, long exposures, intentional camera movement. It's a big spectrum of things. Now, it seems to me that there's different versions of you almost, that when you go into the field, that sometimes, I mean, the concept of taking a dozen frames of ICM and then visualizing that somehow as something that you can play with when you get back to the computer, or develop when you get back to the computer. I hate the word play. But that seems to require quite a lot of in the moment consciousness of your relationship with the content and how that content can become interpreted later on. And that seems to be a very, very different place from getting lost in a blue Himalayan poppy for an hour. They seem to be very, very different. Do you think they reflect different parts of you as a person, or the versions of yourself that you take into the landscape on those individual days?
Gosh, Alister, you're good at this. Huh. Um,
I only do it to get a break.
yeah, so that you, yeah. So, yeah, because I'm thinking about ICMs. I mean, so I mean, I really do try to do this. When I arrive somewhere, I really do try to ask some basic questions. Okay, so I get out of the car and I'm like, so, okay, what's this? What am I feeling? What's resonating? And if I see a gorgeous stand of trees that feel so right for multiple exposures or intentional camera movement, boy, I jump in the backpack and I pull out gear that says that's what I'm going to photograph. I try really hard to go into the field with no expectations at all and just say, what is it today? Rather than, okay, I'm going to Sparks Lane in the Smokies. That means I should be prepared with this lens, and gosh, I hope there's fog there today like there was last time, because man, remember that was great. And then if the sun could just peek out, but that's not what I've done that so many times and know that it doesn't happen that way, that I'm much more comfortable showing up. So I would say the subconscious is probably driving a lot more of what I'm choosing to do in situations. But I would say this, that I'm trying more and more and more probably for the last 3 or 4 years to be much more aware through my work with Flint in the retreats, and him being a Zen priest and helping me to be more, grounded, present, and aware as the gap of where I am, who I am, and all those things. And so I am trying to bring a much more conscious, okay, this is what I'm feeling right now, and that's what I'm going to go capture. So I would have to think a lot more on that one, though, to give you a deeper answer. But trust me, now you've just ruined my whole week, because I will be thinking about this question a lot.
Well, it's curious, because it's why what are the things that influence our choice? What's going on in our mind that makes us pick up a 12 string instead of a 6 string?
Yeah.
On that particular day, what is it that drives those decisions?
Yeah, or churn out rock and roll chords versus acoustic finger picking, beautiful, sappy love songs.
Yeah, arpeggiations versus strumming, picking versus plucking. There's all of these nuances of expression, and what I'm curious about, what is it that makes creative people make these decisions? Because I'm like you, I go into the landscape pretty much most of the time without any expectations at all, and the way I shoot is very much, I recognize some sort of resonance with something I see. So I'll see something that's just like, oh, there it is, bang, point my camera at it, do what comes technically that's required to do that. So it's a very intuitive process for me, but I do tend to do a lot of emotional digging to sort of explore, well, I wonder what that is, why I did that. So yeah, I was curious, because there's so much about what you do that seems to be facets of John Barclay.
Well, the other one that I'm thinking of is the Geary building stuff that I've done,
Right.
And so if I think about why did I do that, man, it was because I had to break through. Initially, the reason that became so good for me was, the story is, my buddy Dan Sniffen said, you should go photograph the Geary building. And of course, my response was, why would I do that? I'm a nature photographer. And then 3-4 years, to make the story very short, same thing, second year, same thing, third year, same thing, fourth year. Finally, I beat him to the punch. I said, okay, look, I know you're going to ask me to go do this. Just tell me where the stupid building is and I'll go do it. And seriously, I went, Alister, with fears, uncertainties, and doubts up the wazoo, because I didn't know what to do. And so that project was born out of fears, uncertainties, and doubts, and trying to conquer them. And so,
right. So what's the relationship between those aesthetics and your fears, anxieties, and doubts?
Yeah, now I'm gonna think about all that. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I create all these very angular, abstract images that I adore. So the easy story to talk about is that I overcame the fears, uncertainties, and doubts. The big awakening I had was, you know what? It's just photography, John. Why is this so hard for you? So that was true, but now it's going to be interesting to go back, and I'll never look at the images again the same. Thanks for that, Alister. I'm going to have to figure out, so, okay, now what do those images represent? Where is that angst in those? Or is there joy in those because I have overcome?
Right, exactly. Exactly. I think an awful lot about the externalization of internal emotional reactions. You know, it's that's where the therapy of landscape photography lies, is somehow externalizing it so that we can gain fresh perspective on it. It's no longer an internal agonizing idiot in your head type of thing. It's an external, oh, I can be rational about that because it's not me.
Right.
So I think landscape photography, or any type of photography, because the photograph you took of the guy's daughter in the gym, in the truck tire, that is, you know, there again, as soon as you bring people into photography, there's an instant recognition. Yeah. Whereas people struggle with landscape photography because what do they say about fine art landscape photography? Is it Arat, another rock, another tree?
Yeah.
And that's really what it is.
Sure.
But for us, for these moments of our life, that rock or that tree or that Himalayan poppy or that dahlia, that becomes us.
Yes, in that moment, for sure. Yeah, so, you know, I know oftentimes that you're in your interviews, you're talking about why people photograph. And, you know, when people ask me that question, it's because it feeds my soul. That's why, if I had to summarize, and that's exactly what I say, it feeds my soul. So it's not about making images that I have to put on a wall, that I have to sell. That's a nice byproduct of feeding my soul. You know, I photograph because I have to. It's my way. It's the key into that nature kingdom experience, right? It's the key that opens the door. That's better, into that place of peace and solace and refuge when it comes specifically to nature photography.
Right.
You know, obviously the buildings and being in the gym with Dalen, those are very different experiences. But if we're talking about nature photography, which I realize is more in where you're at and where your heart lies, you and I are going to be in a very similar place with that, because we're doing it. Yeah, the photograph, as DeWitt would say when we've talked, he says, all this other stuff is so important, and the residue happens to be a good photograph, you know, and I like to say the byproduct. But for me, boy, emotionally, sometimes when you are COVIDed out, you know, we're getting ready to go to Colorado and say hello to Sarah and Jennifer Renwick and David and our friends out there. But I can't tell you the excitement that I have right now for 3 weeks from now, being on the road, driving to Colorado, just to be.
Yeah.
It's going to feel like that, you know, and I don't care if I make a photograph. I'm sure I will, because it's just going to appear before me. But you talk about therapy, man, the therapy of being there in that beautiful environment, surrounded by beauty. And if I have to think about, you know, I just did a series with these guys, you know, DeWitt and Ricky and Flint and myself just did a series about awakening to beauty, a 4-part webinar. And, you know, that's what we talked about, is how beauty can awaken, you know, how we can be awakened to beauty through the lens of a camera. And that beauty can be a nature scene. It can be a Geary building. It can be Marley in that truck tire. But are you aware? Are you open? Are you present, you know, enough to see it? You know, I don't know if I did it on that one because I've cut it out sometimes, but Joshua Bell, that great violinist, world-renowned violinist,
yes,
right? So he's doing a little thing down in the basement of the subway in DC, and people walk by and walk by and walk by and walk by, and there was an experiment. And I show that a lot in my lectures and stuff, because I want people to say, how many times, because you're so not focused or not open enough, are you walking by Joshua Bells in your life? And I do it all the time still. I'm not professing to be an expert at it, But I like seeing that over and over again because it reminds me that I'm prone, just like everybody else is, when we're focused and we got to go to work and we got to get on the subway, that we're not paying attention to those little moments that are being, those gifts that are being presented to us. So as I say in that lecture, are we open? Are we aware? Are we paying attention to those moments that are calling to us?
So don't you think it's ironic that that in everything that we've been kind of talking about so far, it's very obvious that there's beauty everywhere,
Yep.
you know, and I mean, I can look at the glass on my desk right now and the way the light is refracting through it and reflecting through it, and the color and the tonation of the placemat underneath it. I can look at that and get lost in it. So there's beauty absolutely everywhere. And don't you think it's ironic that we spend all of our time focusing on product and gear and all the other stuff, you know, this noise that inhabits the upper part of our consciousness, peer pressure, judgment, expectation, all of this stuff, when the real issue is we don't spend enough time actually just appreciating how much we love interesting stuff. You know?
But Alister, don't you think that's because we're human, right?
Well, yes, and this is funny because when you said something earlier on, and it was this it was focusing on negatives or something like that, right early on at the start of the talk. And I said, oh, there's a very obvious answer to that.
Yeah.
And it's because our head is full of the idiot in our head telling us you can't, you shouldn't, you're no good at this, self-doubt,
unbelievable,
internal judgment, all of that type of stuff.
And as much, and you know, it's funny because when I teach, there comes a time in my lectures where I actually say these words. You probably think, it's like 3/4 of the way through, I say something like this. You probably think this lecture was developed for you, don't you? Wrong. It's all for me. I need this every day of my life because I'm just like you. I struggle with this stuff on a daily basis. And that's why I like these types of discussions, Alister, because, you know, a discussion where I come on and talk about how easy it is for me to do this. Oh my gosh, all you got to do is get a camera and just think about yourself introspectively. Once you do that, you too, that's craziness. It's just, it's a lifetime of effort and work. This does not happen overnight.
But, you know, photography is just a metaphor, isn't it? You know, photography is just a metaphor for our own personal development. You know, I mean, me putting time into my photography, to me, translates me putting time into me.
Your life, sure.
Yeah, it's making my life meaningful and trying to be a better person and trying to be less of an idiot and trying to be less judgmental and less opinionated and, you know, trying to see beyond narrow belief systems.
Yeah. And then it's amazing because when you do that, what happens to your photography?
Of course, it becomes infinite.
Expands. And when you talk to all or listen to, read or speak to all of these people who you hold in high esteem, and it's interesting, and I'll go back to the retreat that we do. At the end of the retreat, we're in this circle in the pavilion where we meet, and we do a circle every day to have these dialogues. At the very last one, we say, okay, how did it go this week? What did you learn? What do you want to bring forth to the group? Alister, guess how many people talk about photography in that group?
Yeah.
None. Every time, nobody sits there and says, I learned about multiple exposures this week. I finally got that nailed. Or, man, depth of field finally resonates with me. No, the entire circle is about, oh my, there's tears almost from every person, because for the first time, we've created a space for them to be held where they can be vulnerable, where they can be honest with who they are as a human being and bring that forth. And then they go home with this whole new knowledge base of, oh my gosh, I like me and I can do this. I can do this and I can bring me into it. And then they hear people like Ricky Cook, you know, 20-year National Geographic guy who comes in and speaks to us, and DeWitt, and they have the same fears, uncertainties, and doubts that all of these people who think that they're not good photographers, and that,
of course.
And I have to say to them, you are a good photographer. What? Stop with this, DeWitt's better than I am. It's not. He's just got more years. So it might be a little easier for him, but it doesn't make him better than you. There is
Right.
no better. I don't know what better is. I know what I like when I see it. That's all I care about. And I know that the images that I make, when I love them, that I love them. And if you don't, that's fine. It's totally fine. I'm still going to love it.
We're covering some really good ground in this. I knew we would. As soon as we agreed to do this, I was so excited about where we were going to take it. And I love the spontaneity of it because, I mean, I don't have a script and you clearly don't know where I'm coming from.
I'm scared to death. What's next? Ah!
Well, sorry, I don't.
It's okay. We're good.
Right. So the human condition is such that we tend to be insecure about our creativity. And I think most musicians are in a similar vein. I think that's really what producers are for. So if we all had a producer,
great.
Maybe that's what we need is we need someone to be a producer and just saying, right, well, this is your creative output. Great. Maybe it just needs a little tweak in this direction, or does this articulate what you're trying to say with this thing?
Yeah.
Now, there was just one more thing that kind of came to my mind. And this is the difficulty, is that we cover so much ground that all of these questions kind of come up in my mind and then they kind of evaporate again because something else comes in. You mentioned your involvement with this healing images, which I think is fabulous. I think it's such a good thing to do. And we'll be putting links up to all of these things down below the video. The concept of healing images is wonderful because I think it's at a time when people are desperately looking for something, hope, something to hang on to, even if it's nostalgia or whatever it may be. What is it about certain aesthetics that can be healing?
We talked about color before. Right, certain color harmonies can absolutely make you feel calm. I mean, we talk about colors in rooms and offices and how important they are to mood and how people feel. But I also think simplicity is really important for many people. I think about a show that I did of all X-Pan. So I don't know, a lot of people watching are probably younger and they're going, what's an X-Pan? They probably don't even know what film is, but back in the days of dinosaurs, when we shot with film, an X-Pan is a Hasselblad camera, actually made by Fuji, honestly. And so I became quite recognized for some of my X-Pan work. And so I did a show of just it. And this one gal came in and there was a Smoky Mountains up at the top of not a Conalifty overlook. It was up at the top of the mountain, overlooking the mountain ridges. And when she saw that, she broke down in tears. And I was like, oh, is it that bad? And she says, no. She says, and she's holding herself. She's like this. She goes, that's home. That is home. And I went, wow. So I saw it as beautiful sunset, simplicity, gorgeous, beautiful, muted pastel tonalities. And it felt very calm and comfortable to me, and that's why I liked it. But it had nothing to do with how she received it, which was another huge lesson for me, because I realized that what I'm seeing and feeling is not going to be necessarily what the viewer is going to see. I think I still need to be mindful and aware that I need to try my best to convey what I'm feeling in that photograph. But as you say before, Alister, sometimes that's really hard because I'm given a set of stuff. These trees, this tree, that sunset, these mountains, whatever, that foreground. I don't know. Can I make Alister feel peace? Dude, I don't know. I'm going to do my best. But as evidenced by this gal seeing that photograph, she had a very different response to it. And it was home with tears. So to me, in the healing images, and just a real quick shout out to that was DeWitt's baby. And what he realized one day as he was going down to the Molokai, Hawaii hospital, and how stark and barren, he says, how do you heal here?
Right.
I feel awful. And so he said, I've got all these images doing nothing. I'm going to give them. So all of the people who are involved in healing images make this much money. I've made nothing. I don't care. You have no idea. When I get my sheet at the end of the year that says who bought those images and where they're it's the most joyous day of the year for me. It's unbelievable. I'm like, yeah, that's so cool that they're using my images in this hospital, in this oncology ward and so forth. And so DeWitt he says, look, here's what we need. We do need images, if you're going to submit, that are peaceful, that are calm, that we don't want, you talked about it before, adding tension in the landscape. It's not going to be really healthy to have some tension type of things. He generally doesn't want people in the images, although he's morphed a little bit there where if it's somebody playing with a ball or a child, there might be something there that could work. But we're very careful. The other thing that's interesting is we're trying to procure or curate images from most of the areas. So if somebody lives in the Southwest, we want more Southwest images because that's going to resonate with home again, or where they live, and make them feel comfortable in those environments where they're dealing with crappy treatments and all the things that they're dealing with.
Right. It's amazing all the things that landscape photography can be, really, or not just landscape photography. I mean, you kind of said that I am, I guess, predominantly involved in the landscape photography, but I've shot plenty of architecture professionally, actually. Birds in a big way. So I think I'm less subject driven. It's all aesthetics to me at the end of the day. But you seem to be a man who's blessed with a remarkable amount of common sense, and a very healthy perspective of your place in the world and what you can do for it. And it's I've forgotten what the question was going to be. How do it doesn't seem like you have a lot of conflict between your life, your creativity, and running a successful business. There doesn't seem, you don't seem one of these people that's like uber conflicted about product versus purity or passion.
Yeah, I am blessed in that regard. I mean, 35 years in the sales world has been exceedingly helpful for transitioning in 2017 to full-time. In 2007, I created my business and started doing workshops back then, and got much more serious, and then realized very quickly that that's what my heart was. As much as I could make money doing, the medical side of the world, and I enjoyed that very much, man, joy. I mean, as they say, what is the saying? And, you teach somebody, or no, if you find a hobby and it's what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. I'm screwing that up terribly. I should never. My wife is going to laugh when she sees this, but she says, John, why do you even try to do those things? Because you never get them right. But I think you know what I mean. If you find something you love and you can do that, you're not working. So I don't feel like I'm working. So, because I think what you're saying, it's really common to have people who are really good business people, not real good creative people, or the opposite, really good creative people who struggle with the business part. And again, no judgment, zero there. It just, that's who they are. That's their makeup, right? And so having a producer, right, or a business person is helpful, right? Or having a wife or partner or whatever who you can work with is really helpful. But yeah, for whatever reason, and that's what Nancy, going back to Nancy and saying, you're born to do this, you just don't know it yet. I believe that I have the gifts of running a business and learning through that experience. And so being able to do those things necessary to survive and pay the mortgage, but at the same time, I can pretty easily and quickly switch right into that creative mode.
Right.
It's not a lot of work for me. It just like, and I have guitars in my office, like you and I spoke, I've got 4 or 5 different, well, actually 7 instruments in here. And a flute, that's 8. But
you beat me by 2.
Yeah, well, it's not a race, but I won. But and I have those for really valid reasons. It's because as I'm working, I can get wrapped up in that really quickly, and then I realize, time for a break, and I bring up guitar tabs online, find a new song I want to learn, and I start playing and having a good time, and I'm in a whole new world at that point.
Right. And I'm the same. I mean, I do exactly the same. Almost immediately after finishing speaking with you, I'll be plugging in a guitar
Yeah.
and
I'd
just
be doing
music.
that after speaking with me too.
Well, that's exactly what I just said. But it's. I think we're on an hour now, so we can start to maybe dial things and sort of wrap it up a wee bit. But the message that you seem to be bringing to the table is something that resonates so strongly with me, which is it's about freedom of choice. It's about freedom of creative decisions. It's about being valid. Every word that's come out of our mouth could be criticized, judged, or corrected. But in the moment, and I think that's the joy of this conversation, it's all been spontaneous. It's just been, ask a question and it's your first response, and that's honesty. You know, and it's exactly like photographs. The things that we produce are spontaneous and kind of honest in their own right. And I'm sick of all this judgment nonsense. And I think the thing I really want to just thank you for is not just this conversation, but all the other things that you've been doing, particularly since lockdown as well, where we've been kind of confined a bit,
Yeah.
is just this huge level of positivity you bring to our art. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation to continue on with some of those thoughts. Trust me, I have my days. I mean, in the early part of COVID, it was hard, and I'm not going to lie, it was really hard because all of a sudden you saw a business being affected and impacted in a
Of course.
very, very serious way, and a possibility of affecting a family, and income disappeared, and so
Mm.
I'm trust me, I'm not one who is always happy every day of my life. I mean, I'm human and I have real challenges, and this has been one. Like another time in my life where I've had a similar situation where a business went totally out of control because of something that I didn't have control of. About 6 weeks after, I said, you know what? I can make a choice. It's me.
Right.
I'm the only one who can fix this. And I can continue to wallow in my gosh, my life is going to disappear and I'm going to fall apart, or I can get back to work. And it was just like that. It was almost like a switch that I said, okay, time to go to work. And I put together a couple of new programs, got together with Flint, and Flint invited me to this that 4-part series, and there's lots of good happening. And man, it was amazing. I just went, I feel back again, and
Yeah.
so I don't want anybody walking away from here thinking that, with that false notion that it's easy every day. It's
Certainly not.
every day I'm a human, and that's the thing. And being human oftentimes is difficult, and we are presented with challenge, but I'm a firm believer that we have a choice in the way we awake to that, the way we meet that. That's really important. And if do I have another minute to another thought in my mind? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely, you do.
I don't want to go too long because I do realize if it's too long, it's not enjoyable for others to listen to. But
Well, I'm enjoying it, and that's all
okay,
that matters.
good. I think about this idea of learning and learning and learning and learning and of everything, not just photography. As a matter of fact, maybe not even photography at this point in my life. That's the thing that I'm finding the most joy is reading books, watching documentaries that have nothing to do with photography, but are educating me as a human being. I think about Jay Mizell, who, is very, I think acerbic might be a good word. I hope I'm using that in the right way, but he can be pretty much in your face New Yorker, right? But he was in a lecture one time and somebody asked him, how do I make more interesting photographs? And without missing the beat, he says, become a more interesting person.
I said that to someone in a workshop once.
Wow, there you go. How did that go, Alister?
Well, they haven't been back yet.
Oh, that's a problem. And I'm sure you meant it with the most kind and loving intent.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was meant well.
Yeah, of course, it might not have been received well, and I understand that. I've had those moments. But seriously, I mean, he was right. I mean, how can you possibly add more to your art without you as a human being growing? And so my encouragement as we do wrap up is that people do start to read more. I'm reading books about race right now because
Right.
I was ignorant, just flat out ignorant, right? I think or I thought I knew what I knew, but I knew nothing. And so this has been a wonderful time of awakening for me to learn more about race. I'm reading books because of Flint Sparks, who's, you know, my dear friend and Zen priest, on Buddhism and some of those practices, so that I can learn more about that. And boy, is there great wisdom there that I'm being able to pull into my own life, which I know then is going to be part of my photography. The whole idea of learning those Zen practices from Flint 3 or 4 years ago, when we started doing, 4 or 5 years ago, we started doing these retreats. That's probably the biggest shift. If I could say, is there been one shift in my photography that's made me finally go, you know what, I like what I'm doing? It's that. It's meeting Flint Sparks and his presence in my life to help me realize, to stop judging, to stop doing all those things that we've talked about that I don't want to repeat again. But that, if there's one takeaway from this discussion for those listening or who still are listening, boy, if you can get to that place where you stop that judgment, and you just get in touch with celebrating what's right in the world, as DeWitt would say, or photographing what makes your heart sing, that I say, or whoever your favorite photographer is, whatever Alister is telling you, listen to that part of what's being shared, and trust that these people like Alister and Bill Neal and DeWitt Jones and on and on and on, who have lived this life of creativity, and they're saying that's the most important thing, they're saying it for a reason. It's really, really, really important.
We're so on the same page for that. I mean, it's funny because my creativity in photography changed so much when I lived in Tibet, as you know, yes. And then I was in the Gobi 7 times in 3 years. And when you go into the desert and you're in a very vulnerable state and you're meditating at the same time, all of a sudden your eyes open. And I always felt the concept of enlightenment was always as will-o'-the-wisp like as the concept of creativity. And we seek creativity as we seek enlightenment. And the joy of enlightenment is the realization that it's something you already possess.
Yeah.
And creativity is the same. And I think we all have creativity. And
Absolutely.
I don't believe that anybody is incapable of being creative.
We agree.
So yeah, I think we're so on the same page, and we could have had a dozen different conversations today, because I think there's great breadth in both of our perspectives, and that non-judgment allows for a very forgiving approach to how our work and our lives and our art are kind of all very symbiotic.
Yes. After all, again, all I can bring to this act of creativity in photography is me.
Right.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job.
Well, I'm trying. It's a constant evolution. It's a constant process. I love being at the retreat and listening to Ricky Cook, who's a deep well of wisdom. And then when he talks about the fact that at 70, whatever he is, 5 years old, 3 years old, that he's still trying to figure out what happens before he makes a photograph. Holy cow. That just smacks me right up here and says, John, stop worrying so much about this stuff. Just be mindful, be present, be aware, be open. And then do that stuff afterwards that you're going to now make me do about all these images. I got to go back and think about, because when we talk again, and hopefully there'll be another again, I'm going to have answers for you.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, we'll diarize that one then. How many decades do you want?
I have at least till I'm 80, maybe.
Well, John, I you know me, I live on my emotions the entire time, and if anything can be said about me, is I'm honest, and yes. And I truly adored talking to you today. It's been a real honor for me to talk to you.
Well, likewise, Alister, this has been a pleasant surprise to receive your invitation. And what a joy to have a conversation. There's nothing more that I would love to do than to have dialogue about photography. That makes my heart sing.
Good man. Good man. Thanks.
Take good care.
We'll do this again.
Bye-bye now.